I knew the plant had failed before I even picked up the phone. It was a Saturday morning, the kind of crisp, clear autumn morning that makes you glad to be alive, and more importantly, glad to be unemployed. I was sitting on the deck of my cabin, about 40 miles from the nearest cell tower, watching the mist roll off the lake. My phone had been buzzing for 20 minutes. First, it was the automated alert system, an app I had written myself 5 years ago. It sent a single ping when server latency went above 50 milliseconds. Then, a double ping when the temperature of the server room spiked. And finally, the distinct, terrifying siren tone that meant critical infrastructure failure. I wasn't supposed to have that app on my phone anymore. They had fired me on Thursday. They had wiped my company phone, revoked my email access, and escorted me out of the building like a criminal. But I had written the alert protocol to push to my personal device as a backup years ago, and in their haste to get rid of the old dinosaur, they had forgotten to revoke that specific API key. So, I sat there, sipping my coffee, watching the notifications stack up on my screen like a digital car crash. 10:04 a.m. Hydraulic pressure warning sector 4. 10:05 a.m. Main safety controller no response. 10:06 a.m. emergency shutoff failed. 10:07 a.m. connection lost. And then, the phone calls started. Not the automated ones, the human ones. It started with the shift manager, then the VP of operations, and finally, the CEO himself, the man who had sat across the table from me 48 hours ago and told me I lacked the vision for the company's future. I let it ring, once, twice, 10 times. I wasn't being petty. Well, maybe I was being a little petty. But mostly, I was letting the panic set in. I knew exactly what was happening inside that factory. I knew that 50,000 gallons of pressurized coolant were currently boiling in the lines. I knew that the robotic arms were freezing in place. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that Braden, the CEO's 22-year-old nephew and the new head of digital innovation, was currently staring at a wall of red error text, realizing that his Ivy League degree and his 6-week coding bootcamp hadn't prepared him for the reality of industrial physics. This is the story of how a billion-dollar company decided that experience was expensive, but ignorance was free. And it's the story of how I charged them a year's salary to work for a single afternoon. To understand why this disaster happened, you have to understand the machine. Our facility wasn't some trendy Silicon Valley startup with bean-bag chairs and kombucha on tap. We were a heavy industrial forge. We took raw ingots of titanium and steel and pressed them into aircraft landing gear and engine casings. It was loud. It was hot. Was dangerous. I'm Mark. I've been the senior systems architect for this facility for 22 years. When I started, network was a stack of floppy disks and a clipboard. Over 2 decades, I built the digital nervous system of that plant from scratch. The core of our operation ran on a piece of software I had nicknamed the Beast. It was a complex, custom-written middleware that translated the commands from our modern servers into the ancient, reliable language of the PLCs, the programmable logic controllers that actually moved the hydraulic presses. The Beast wasn't pretty. If you looked at the code, looked like a mess. There were thousands of lines that appeared to do absolutely nothing. There were commands. There were loops that just counted to 1,000,000 and stopped. There were redundant checks where the system would ask, "Is the valve open?" And then, a millisecond later, ask again, "Sure, the valve is open." To an outsider, it looked like garbage. It looked like bloatware. But it wasn't garbage. It was rhythm. You see, hydraulic fluid changes viscosity when it's cold. In the winter, the fluid moves about 4% slower than in the summer. If you send a command to close a valve instantly in January, the fluid is too thick, the pressure spikes, and you blow a seal. My code accounted for that. Those empty loops, they were timing buffers that adjusted based on the ambient temperature of the factory floor. Those redundant checks, they were there because high-voltage magnetic fields from the welding robots sometimes caused bit flips in the sensors. I had spent 20 years tuning that code, was the only reason we hadn't had a catastrophic accident in 2 decades. And then, old man Miller retired. Miller was the founder. He was a grumpy old engineer who hated computers, but he respected results. He left me alone because the factory ran, but when he sold his shares and moved to Florida, the board brought in a new CEO. A guy named Greg. Greg was a numbers guy. Greg didn't care about hydraulic viscosity. Greg cared about efficiency, synergy, and modernization. And Greg brought Braden. Braden was the kind of kid who used words like disrupt and paradigm in casual conversation. He was 22, freshly graduated with a degree in marketing, and he had completed a full-stack developer boot camp online. Naturally, his uncle Greg hired him as the director of digital transformation. Braden's first week was a nightmare. He walked around the factory floor wearing a pristine white hard hat that looked like a toy, holding an iPad, shaking his head at everything. He called a meeting with the IT department on Tuesday morning. There were 4 of us, me, 2 sysadmins, and a database guy. We were all in our 40s or 50s. We wore polo shirts and safety boots. Braden walked in wearing a slim, fit suit and loafers with no socks. "Gentlemen," Braden said, not even looking at us as he connected his MacBook to the projector. "I've spent the last 3 days auditing your codebase. And frankly, I'm shocked." He pulled up a slide. It was a screenshot of the beast. "My code. This," he said, pointing a laser pointer at the screen, "is a disaster. It's spaghetti code. It's inoptimized. It's full of legacy bloat. I found a loop yesterday that delays the main intake valve by 500 milliseconds. Do you know how much time that wastes over a year? We are losing productivity because of lazy coding." I raised my hand. I tried to be polite. "Braden," I said, "that delay isn't lazy. It's a thermal buffer. The valves are pneumatic. They physically take time to close. If you send the closey command and the press command at the same time, the press will come down while the valve is still half open. You'll destroy the intake." Braden chuckled. It was a condescending, pitying sound. "Mark, right?" he said. "Mark, that is exactly the kind of legacy thinking we need to move away from. You're thinking about hardware limitations. I'm thinking about software solutions. In the modern stack, we don't wait for hardware. We optimize. We use asynchronous calls. We use prediction algorithms. You can't use an algorithm to make air move faster," I said. "Not with that attitude, you can't," he replied. The other guys looked at me. We all knew. We knew right then that this was going to end badly. But we didn't know how fast. Over the next month, Braden began his crusade against the bloat. He started small. He redesigned the company intranet. It looked pretty, but it crashed if more than 10 people tried to log in at once. He switched our secure email server to a cheap cloud provider that had an outage 3 days later. But Braden was a master of spin. When the email went down, he blamed our old computers for not being compatible with his high-speed cloud architecture. He convinced his uncle Greg that the problem wasn't his bad decisions. It was the ploy that the company still employed people like me who resisted change. The tension came to a head on a Wednesday in late October. I came into work to find that my access to the main control server had been restricted to RAID only. I stormed into Braden's office. He was sitting on a yoga ball, drinking a green smoothie. "Braden, why can't I push updates to the safety controller?" I asked. "Oh hey Mark," he said, not looking up from his scrone. "Yeah, we're migrating the safety controller to a new repository. I'm personally overseeing a refactor of the codebase. We're going to trim the fat. I'm deleting all that dead code you wrote." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "Braden, listen to me. There is no dead code in that controller. Every line is written in blood. Every wait command exists because a piece of machinery broke 20 years ago and we fixed it." He spun around on his yoga ball to face me. "Mark, you are hoarding knowledge. You write complex code so that nobody else can understand it, just to keep your job secure. It's dishonest. I'm going to clean it up. I'm going to make it lean. By Monday this plant will be running 20% faster. If you remove the dampening loops, I said, my voice shaking, the main turbine will vibrate itself off its mountings. It will kill someone. You're being dramatic, he spat. You're an obstructionist, and honestly, I don't think you fit the culture here anymore. Fine, I said. If you touch that code, I want it on record that I advised against it. Noted, he said. The firing happened 2 days later. I was called into HR. Greg, the CEO, was there. Braden was there, smiling like a cat who had just eaten the canary. Mark, Greg said, looking uncomfortable. We've decided to move in a different direction. Braden has presented a roadmap for a fully automated, cloud-native control system. He believes that your adherence to older methodologies is a bottleneck. He means I won't let him blow up the factory. I said, this attitude, Braden interrupted, is exactly why you're leaving. You're toxic, Mark. You're negative. They slid a severance package across the table. It was standard. 6 months pay and non-disclosure agreement. I looked at the paperwork. Then I looked at Greg. I said, I will sign this, but I need you to sign something for me. I pulled a document out of my folder. I had written it the night before. It was a liability waiver. It stated, very clear legal terms, that Mark, the employee, had warned Braden, the director, and Greg, the CEO, that removing the specific subroutines known as the dampeners would result in catastrophic mechanical failure. It stated that I was being terminated against my professional advice, and that I bore zero responsibility for what happened to the equipment. After I walked out that door, Greg laughed. You want me to sign a waiver for a computer bug? If Braden is as good as he says he is, I said, then this piece of paper is meaningless. It's just the ramblings of a paranoid old man. Humor me. Braden grabbed the pen. I'll sign it. I'm happy to put my name on the improvements I'm making. He signed it with a flourish. Greg signed it as a witness. I packed my desk in silence. I took my framed photo of the team from 2005. I took my mug, and most importantly, I took the external hard drive that sat in my bottom drawer. The one that contained the only backup of the system, as it existed there before. Braden got his hands on it. I walked out of the building at 3:00 p.m. on Thursday. Braden was scheduled to deploy his optimization patch on Friday night at midnight, during the weekend maintenance window. Which brings us back to Saturday morning. I finally picked up the phone around 11:30 a.m. It was Greg. Mark. His voice was cracking. He sounded like he had aged 10 years in 10 hours. Hello, Greg, I said. Enjoying the autumn weather. Mark, stop. Please, it's gone. It's all gone. What's gone? Greg, the system. Braden deployed the patch last night. He said it went fine, but when the shift started this morning, I could hear the chaos in the background. People shouting. Alarms still blaring. Let me guess, I said. The startup sequence initiated, but the main pressure valves didn't open fast enough. The fluid backed up. The turbines detected the resistance and tried to compensate by spinning faster, but because the vibration dampeners were deleted, they shook the sensors loose. Now the computer thinks the pressure is zero, so it's pumping maximum power into a closed system. There was a silence on the line. A long, terrified silence. How did you know that? Greg whispered. Because I wrote the code that prevented that exact scenario, Greg, and your nephew deleted it because he thought it was bloatware. Can you fix it? Greg asked. Mark, the lines are frozen. We are losing $40,000 an hour in production. The client from Boeing is flying in on Monday for an inspection. If the line isn't running, we lose the contract. We lose everything. I don't work for you, Greg, I said. I'll hire you back, he shouted. Double your salary. Anything. I don't want a job, I said calmly. I want a contract. What? I am now an independent consultant, I said. My rate for emergency disaster recovery is $500 an hour. Minimum billable block of 100 hours, paid up front. And I want Braden out of the pool into the parking lot. $500 and... Greg stammered. Mark, that's extortion. No, Greg. Extortion is illegal. This is supply and demand. You have a supply of broken robots. I have the only demand for the knowledge to fix them. Do we have a deal? Or should I go back to fishing? I heard him cover the phone. I heard him yelling at someone, presumably Braden. I heard a door slam. Deal, Greg said. Just get here. I pulled into the parking lot 40 minutes later. Security didn't ask for my badge. They waved me through like I was the president. When I walked onto the factory floor, it was worse than I imagined. The smell of burnt rubber and overheated hydraulic fluid hung in the air like a fog. The silence was eerie. This factory was never silent. It was always humming, thumping, hissing. Now, it was a graveyard of metal. Greg met me at the door to the server room. He looked pale. Braden is gone, he said. I sent him home. Good, I said. I sat down at my old terminal. My chair was still adjusted to my height. I plugged in my external hard drive. The fix wasn't difficult, technically speaking. Braden hadn't just modified the code, he had butchered it. He had deleted nearly 40% of the instruction set. He had removed every safety check, every thermal buffer, every latency delay. He had turned a sophisticated industrial ballad into a brute force sledgehammer. But he hadn't wiped the BIOS backups. I initiated a full system restore from my external drive. What are you doing? Greg asked, hovering over my shoulder. I'm putting the bloatware back, I said. It took about 3 hours for the code to propagate. I spent that time drinking coffee and watching the progress bar. Greg paced back and forth, sweating. 30:30 p.m. The screen flashed Mary 80Y. Is that it? Greg asked. Not quite, I said. The brain is fixed. But Braden broke the body. I keyed the mic for the PA system. Maintenance crew to Sector 4. The safety locks are disengaged. You can now manually release the pressure valves. Do not, I repeat, do not engage the pumps until you have replaced the intake seals. I heard a cheer go up from the floor. The maintenance guys know exactly what to do. They just needed the computer to stop fighting them. By 600 p.m., the first turbine spun up. It hummed. It didn't shake. It didn't scream. It just hummed that low, steady frequency that I had listened to for 20 years. The bloatware caught the vibration, adjusted the timing by 12 milliseconds and smoothed it out. Greg slumped against the wall. Thank God. I stood up and handed him an invoice. It was for $50,000. I expect that wired by Monday morning, I said. The fallout was swift. The damage to the factory was extensive. It cost them about $3 million in repairs and lost time. They missed the deadline for the Boeing inspection, but they managed to keep the contract, barely. Braden wasn't just fired. The board of directors sued him for gross negligence. Turns out that when you sign a waiver saying, I take full responsibility, and then you destroy a factory, lawyers take that very seriously. He's currently working at a cell phone kiosk at the mall. As for Greg, he kept his job, but he was neutered. The board put a mandatory change review board in place. Nothing gets updated without 3 signatures from senior engineers. They offered me the chief technology officer position a week later. They offered me a corner office, a company car, and a massive salary. I turned them down. I realized that I liked fishing. I liked sleeping in on Saturdays. I still work for them, but strictly as a consultant. I come in once a month, check the logs, tweak the bloatware to account for the aging machinery, and bill them my exorbitant hourly rate. Whenever a new Whiz kid comes in and asks why the code is so messy, why it has so many loops, and why it's so slow, Greg points to the empty desk where I used to sit. Don't touch it, Greg tells them. That's not mess, that's load-bearing code. And that, my friends, is why you never fire the only guy who knows where the bodies are buried, or in this case, where the sensors are calibrated. Because sometimes, what looks like bloat to a tourist looks like structural integrity to the architect.